November the 2nd, 1943, 10:43 p.m. Over the English Channel. A piercing howl rips through the quiet of the night. The air crackles with static and fear, the cold biting at every exposed inch of skin. A young RAF radar operator, his face bathed in the dim light of the flickering radar screen, sweats as he scans the glowing blips. His fingers tighten on the dials. One small twist, one tiny adjustment could change everything. "Got 'em," he mutters under his breath. But the blip on his screen is not what he expects. The aircraft interception radar is erratic, spitting out useless data. Another minute, then the same result, more noise, no clear image. He presses the receiver harder against his ear, his heart pounding. In the distance, behind a thick layer of clouds, the Luftwaffe bombers are coming, on their way to London where 200 tons of bombs would rain down. The radar system, supposedly equipped with cutting-edge AI technology, was hailed as the next great breakthrough in the fight against the Axis powers. But right now, it's showing nothing but static. Could they still win this fight? The hangar smells of oil and sweat on November 2nd, 1943. At 11 p.m, RAF Biggin Hill is alive with the low hum of fighter engines, muffling the murmur of anxious chatter. Ground crew rush between fighter aircraft, checking fuel levels, tire pressure, and armament loads with practiced efficiency. Sergeant Thomas Walker, a mechanic with more grit than luck, slaps a fresh patch of duct tape on the tail section of a Spitfire McKnight. He does his job like clockwork. No mistakes, no regrets allowed in wartime operations. The humdrum of routine keeps the nerves in check, the familiar motions a shield against mounting pressure. But even Tommy can feel the weight of what's coming tonight, pressing down on every man present. A fresh shipment of radar equipment is wheeled into the hangar, drawing Tommy's gaze from his work. This new AI radar, aircraft interception equipment, which was supposed to be the game changer for the RAF night fighters, is part of a larger operation led by Squadron Commander Major Doug Henderson. Tommy's not sure about the system's reliability after watching the early tests produce disappointing results. The radar's performance was underwhelming in initial trials, with a group of RAF engineers privately dubbing it, quote, useless in mess hall conversations. But that didn't matter much now, not with German bombers already forming up across the channel. What mattered was that it was the only technological edge between their fighters and the incoming swarm of enemy aircraft. With no time to lose and the clock pressing toward midnight, Henderson addresses the assembled crew. "Tonight's going to be different from any mission we've flown before," he announces, his voice carrying across the concrete floor. "We'll be using the new radar systems, and I'm counting on every single one of you to make this work." The crew exchanges skeptical looks, tired eyes meeting across the dim hangar space. But there's no time for doubt or debate. They move to their planes with determined purpose, engines roaring to life in synchronized chaos that shakes the ground beneath their boots. Pilot Flying Officer Jack Thompson grips the yoke of his Spitfire at 11:35 p.m, November 2nd, 1943, over the English Channel. The lights of London flicker in the distance like dying embers scattered across the darkness. His bomber interception radar screen is fuzzy, displaying nothing but static interference and occasional phantom returns. "Bloody useless," he mutters under his breath, rubbing his temples with one gloved hand while maintaining control with the other. Despite the promise of AI-driven technology that Command had briefed them on repeatedly, the radar still can't distinguish between distant cloud formations and actual enemy aircraft with any reliable accuracy. Jack had been trained to rely on instincts honed through dozens of combat sorties, visual sightings of enemy bombers, evasive maneuvers in close-quarters dogfights, reading the night sky for telltale exhaust flames, But the new radar was supposed to offer a safety net, a technological advantage that would let them find the enemy before the enemy found them first. And yet the equipment sits in his cockpit like a temperamental passenger, offering more frustration than assistance. Another blip, a faint ambiguous dot, flickers onto the screen between waves of electronic snow. Is that it? Jack wonders aloud, but there's no time to second-guess readings or wait for confirmation. Command, do you read? I've got a hit on radar, but it's weak and intermittent, Jack reports over his comms, pressing the transmit button on his control column. A voice crackles back through heavy static interference. Roger that. Estimate 38 miles to your left bearing. Should be a bomber squadron inbound from occupied France. Jack's heart skips a beat as he banks the Spitfire left, scanning both his instruments and the darkness ahead. If the radar can't see them clearly enough for a reliable intercept vector, what's to say they'll reach the target in time? The margin for error shrinks with every passing minute, with every mile the German bombers close on London. Inside the control room at RAF Biggin Hill, midnight arrives with no fanfare on November 2nd, 1943. Major Doug Henderson stares at his radar operator, Sergeant Walker, watching the young man's face illuminated by pale green scope light. The readings are almost non-existent, flickering lines where a clear pattern should be displayed, ghost echoes where solid contacts ought to appear. But Tommy's not giving up despite the equipment's failures, not with lives hanging in the balance. He's learned the art of making things work when they shouldn't, the same practical ingenuity he applies when fixing damaged aircraft mid-operation with whatever materials come to hand. Tommy leans into the radar console, making manual adjustments to gain settings and frequency tuning. He taps the screen lightly with his knuckles, almost as though to knock the ghosts and interference out of the temperamental cathode ray tube. "Come on, you bloody thing," he mutters, coaxing the machine like a stubborn animal. His fingers work the controls with the delicate touch of a safecracker, knowing that too much adjustment will scatter the returns completely, while too little leaves them drowning in noise. Just then, the radar catches something substantial, a full, solid blip that holds steady on the screen. "Got something here, sir," Tommy announces, his voice tight with excitement and uncertainty mixed in equal measure. "Bearing 270, range approximately 42 miles, and closing at speed." Major Henderson comes over immediately, his boots loud on the concrete floor. "Is it real?" he asks, scanning the blinking screen with experienced eyes that have seen too many false contacts and equipment failures. Could be weather, could be mechanical ghost echoes from the system itself. Tommy nods slowly, watching the contact persist through 3 full-scope rotations. "I think so, sir, but we'll need visual confirmation to be absolutely certain," he replies. "A direct intercept is the only way we're going to stop them before they reach London airspace. The air is alive with static and the roar of Merlin engines at 12:05 a.m. on November 3rd, 1943, over the English Channel. Jack's Spitfire hurtles through the night at 320 miles per hour, guided only by the flickering returns on his radar scope and combat instincts developed through months of night operations. The familiar tension of imminent conflict grips him, tightening his chest and sharpening every sense to razor focus. He waits with practiced patience, eyes darting from the dim radar screen to the ever-darkening skies ahead, searching for any visual confirmation. Then, through the fog of uncertainty and electronic interference, he sees them emerging from cloud cover. A wave of Luftwaffe bombers breaks through the overcast layer, their dark silhouettes briefly visible against lighter clouds behind. The radar screen confirms their position with sudden clarity, now solid and clear where moments ago there was only ambiguous noise. The radar's faint echoes from earlier were no anomaly or equipment malfunction after all. This was the breakthrough moment. The machine had finally found them, had finally proven its worth, despite all the doubts. "Target locked, weapons hot," Jack mutters, pushing the control column forward and diving toward the enemy formation. His pulse quickens as adrenaline floods his system, years of training taking over automatic control of his actions. He's finally seeing the fruits of countless hours spent learning the new equipment, figuring out the flaws in every system through trial and bitter error. The bombers are now visible in his gun sights, their shapes growing larger with frightening speed. The new radar had done its job despite the rough start, but it was still an untested weapon in combat conditions, with human error and mechanical failure lurking behind every corner. "On my mark now," Jack barks over the comms, feeling a rush of focused aggression. He squeezes the trigger, releasing a burst of 20mm cannon fire at the bomber's tail section, watching tracers arc through the darkness. Back on the ground at RAF Biggin Hill, 12:30 a.m. finds Tommy watching as the radar finally gives clear, consistent feedback. But now there's a new problem emerging from the green scope glow. The radar shows more and more targets appearing, too many aircraft to intercept, with their available night fighter strength. The Luftwaffe's tactics had changed dramatically since the Blitz years. They were sending in waves of bombers now, each wave timed and spaced perfectly to confuse and overwhelm their interceptors through sheer numerical superiority. "I can't keep up with this rate of contacts," Tommy says through gritted teeth, his hand moving rapidly between radar controls. "We've got at least 15 distinct formations showing now, maybe more obscured by clutter." Major Henderson steps in beside him, pulling out a tactical plotting map marked with defensive sectors and squadron positions. "We're not done yet, not by a long stretch," he replies firmly. "We've got to vector every available aircraft, coordinate with neighboring sectors, try again and again until this radar system learns how to prioritize the real threats from the noise." The radar is beginning to feel like a reluctant partner in the defensive effort, one that's only partway through understanding and revealing its true tactical potential. Henderson understands with cold clarity that every failure here, every missed intercept or delayed vector has the potential to be fatal for civilians sheltering in London below. The mathematics of aerial warfare are unforgiving. Bomber speed multiplied by time equals distance to target, and distance to target equals lives that might be saved or lost. Records from that night would later show the radar operators worked continuously for 6 hours without relief, manually tracking formations as the equipment struggled under operational stress. Henderson watches Tommy work with grim respect, knowing the young sergeant is performing miracles with imperfect tools and incomplete information. The weight of command sits heavy on his shoulders, the knowledge that his decisions will be measured in lives and buildings. Jack's Spitfire veers through enemy defensive fire at 12:55 a.m., the radar screen flashing intermittent warnings as return fire brackets his position. The radar system, having shown its first genuine success earlier, now falters and flickers under the intensity of electronic warfare. Come on," Jack hisses through clenched teeth, fighting to maintain both aircraft control and situational awareness, as the radar alternates between clear hits and complete signal loss. Each moment feels heavier with consequence. How many bombers had already slipped past the defensive cordon because of the malfunctioning system's blind spots and dead zones? In the distance ahead, more German aircraft appear, too many for the RAF's available night fighter strength to handle effectively. Each bomber represents not just a tactical challenge, but a piece of humanity's struggle for survival, carrying tons of high explosive destined for homes and factories below. Jack knows the mathematics. If even half these bombers reach London, the casualties will be catastrophic. The new radar was supposed to shift those odds decisively in Britain's favour, but operational reality has proven far more complex than test conditions. He banks hard left, following a new contact that blooms on his scope, feeling the G-forces press him into his seat. The Spitfire responds beautifully despite the stress, Supermarine's engineering proving itself once again in combat conditions. But even the finest aircraft can't overcome fundamental limitations in detection capability when the enemy employs jamming equipment and tactical dispersion. Jack watches another bomber formation slide past his intercept zone, too distant for engagement, and curses the technology that promised so much. The radio crackles with voices from other pilots reporting similar frustrations, contacts appearing and vanishing, intercepts missed by narrow margins, bombers slipping through gaps in the defensive coverage. The Luftwaffe had learned from earlier losses and adapted their approach, exploiting every weakness in Britain's defensive system. The night belongs to whoever can best navigate the chaos of electronic warfare and mechanical unreliability. At 1:05 a.m. on November 3rd, 1943, the operations room at RAF Biggin Hill hums with controlled urgency. Maps covered with grease pencil tracks line the walls, showing the evolving tactical situation across the Channel approaches. Tommy monitors 3 different radar scopes simultaneously, his eyes burning from hours of concentration on flickering green displays. Each scope tells a different part of the story: long-range early warning, height-finding returns, and the tactical plotting scope that attempts to sort friend from foe. Major Henderson moves between stations, coordinating with sector control and neighbouring airfields to create a comprehensive defensive response. The telephone lines run hot with reports, aircraft scrambled from Tangmere, additional fighters launching from Kenley, ground observers reporting engine sounds passing overhead. The RAF's defensive network operates at maximum capacity, every resource committed to stopping the bomber stream before it reaches London's heart, but the numbers tell a sobering story that no amount of courage can overcome alone. Intelligence estimates suggest the Luftwaffe committed over 300 bombers to tonight's operation, while RAF Fighter Command has perhaps 70 night. Fighters available across all sectors. The mathematics of attrition favour the attacker, who can afford losses that would cripple the defence. Henderson knows this calculation intimately, has studied the operational research reports that lay bare the brutal arithmetic of aerial warfare. Tommy suddenly sits upright, adjusting his scope's focus with renewed intensity. "Sir, I'm getting something different here," he reports, his voice cutting through the background radio chatter. "The returns are stronger now, more coherent than before. It's like the system's suddenly locked onto the proper frequency." Henderson crosses to his position quickly, studying the display over the sergeant's shoulder. Where before there was scattered noise and intermittent contacts, now clear formations appear with unprecedented definition. "The radar's finally working as designed," Henderson observes quietly, understanding that this moment might represent the turning point they desperately needed. "Get these positions to all fighters immediately. Every vector counts now." Jack receives the updated vectors at 1:20 a.m., his radio suddenly alive with precise intercept information. The transformation is remarkable. Where before he was flying partially blind, relying on visual acquisition and guesswork, now he has concrete target data. Hunter lead, you have multiple contacts bearing 095, range 22 miles, Angels 15. The controller's voice comes through clearly. Jack banks toward the new heading, watching his radar screen display the targets with newfound clarity. The technical breakthrough that Tommy achieved on the ground now manifests in the air as tactical advantage. Jack can see the bomber formation's shape and disposition on his scope, can judge their speed and heading with accuracy that seemed impossible just an hour ago. "Tally-ho," he transmits, using the traditional fighter pilot's call as he spots the enemy aircraft silhouetted against scattered clouds. His approach is textbook perfect. Altitude advantage, stern attack vector, moon behind him to mask his approach. He opens fire at 400 yards, walking his cannon shells into the nearest bomber's port engine. The bomber shudders under the impact, flames blossoming from damaged fuel lines. Jack doesn't watch it fall. There are too many other targets requiring immediate attention, too many bombers still pressing toward London. He pulls up hard, rolls inverted, and dives on another contact that his radar screen shows, climbing to evade. The night sky becomes a three-dimensional chess game played at 300 miles per hour, with death as the penalty for miscalculation. Other RAF fighters are achieving similar results across the defensive zone. The improved radar information flows to every aircraft, multiplying the effectiveness of each interceptor exponentially. What began as a desperate defense against overwhelming odds has transformed into something approaching a coordinated battle, with the radar system finally providing the force multiplier that air defense doctrine had predicted but never quite achieved before this night. Records would later show that between 1:20 and 2:15 a.m., RAF night fighters engaged over 100 enemy aircraft using the improved radar vectors. Tommy hears new alarms at 1:45 a.m., but these are different from the earlier warnings of system failure. His hands shake not from fear but from exhaustion and adrenaline as he watches the screens flash updates faster than he can manually track. The RAF had been losing ground earlier, overwhelmed by superior numbers and relentless attacks that exploited every gap. They had done all they could with imperfect tools and incomplete information, but the enemy's numerical advantage was taking its inevitable toll on defensive coordination. Through a crackling communications line, Jack's voice cuts through the organized chaos. "Request immediate backup. There's too many of them in Sector 4. Tommy's eyes widen with the weight of the tactical situation unfolding. If the radar can't give them the decisive advantage needed to overcome the numbers disadvantage, the bombers will break through to London in strength. The formations keep coming in waves, each one timed to arrive just as defenders are landing for fuel and ammunition. But then, in a moment born of desperation and technical intuition, Tommy does something that would later be studied in operational research reports. He adjusts the radar's frequency calibration one final time, pushing the equipment beyond its normal operating parameters. The risk is considerable. He might burn out the magnetron tube entirely, leaving them completely blind. But the alternative is accepting certain failure, watching helplessly as bombers stream past to their targets. The radar hums differently now, the tone changing from erratic static to a clearer, more focused signal. He watches the display sharpen, contacts resolving with unprecedented detail and stability. The system has found its optimal operating point through trial and error, through human intuition working in concert with electronic capability. Tommy turns to Major Henderson, his voice steady despite the fatigue. "This is it, sir. We've got them now. Clear tracks on every formation, height data showing accurately, even distinguishing aircraft types by return signature." Henderson nods, already reaching for the telephone to sector control. The breakthrough they needed has arrived. Jack flies with newfound confidence at 2:10 a.m., fully trusting the radar system that had seemed so unreliable just hours earlier. He locks onto his targets with precision that would have been impossible before, the blips on his screen matching enemy bomber positions perfectly. He squeezes the trigger smoothly, sending rounds arcing through the night toward a Heinkel, He 111 struggling to maintain formation. Explosions light up the sky as the bomber's fuel tanks detonate, the aircraft plummeting toward the dark waters of the channel far below. In the control room at RAF Biggin Hill, Tommy watches the radar system ping steadily with confirmed intercepts. Each bomber hit is now visible as contacts disappear from the scope or descend rapidly from formation altitude. The breakthrough they had been waiting for, had been fighting toward through mechanical failures and tactical frustration, has finally arrived in full force. The radar displays show a battle unfolding across hundreds of square miles of airspace, with RAF fighters systematically engaging and destroying bomber formations before they can reach their targets. But it's not enough to relax or celebrate prematurely. The fight rages on with undiminished intensity, the Luftwaffe continuing to press their attack despite mounting losses. Jack's fingers press harder on the controls as he flies deeper into the bomber stream, hunting for targets among the scattered formations. His ammunition runs low after multiple engagements, forcing him to make every burst count with careful aim. The radar shows more contacts ahead, an apparently endless stream of enemy aircraft committed to reaching London regardless of cost. Other fighters report similar situations, ammunition exhausted, fuel running low, multiple victories claimed, but still more bombers pressing forward. The mathematics of attrition work both ways tonight. The Luftwaffe is paying an unprecedented price for their persistence, but some bombers will inevitably break through the defensive cordon. Tommy tracks the bomber stream's progress, calculating intercept ratios and defensive coverage with practiced efficiency. The night's outcome remains uncertain despite the technological breakthrough, dependent on endurance and ammunition as much as radar capability. By 3:30 a.m. on November 3, 1943, the pattern becomes clear in the plotting room. The Luftwaffe formations are withdrawing, turning back toward occupied Europe after sustaining losses that exceed any previous night operation. Tommy watches the contacts on his screen drift eastward, some limping on damaged engines, others diving toward emergency landing sites in France. The radar system that had seemed so unreliable at mission start has maintained stable performance for over 2 hours now, providing the consistent tactical picture that transformed defensive operations. Major Henderson receives preliminary reports from sector control and neighbouring airfields, each one adding to the emerging picture of the night's battle. Fighter pilots report an unprecedented number of confirmed kills and probable destructions, figures that seem almost impossible until corroborated by multiple sources. Ground observers along the coast describe seeing bombers fall into the channel in flames, explosions lighting up the darkness like brief stars. Navy patrol boats report debris fields and survivors in the water, evidence of the catastrophic toll inflicted on the attacking force. The radar plots tell their own story, one that Henderson studies with professional satisfaction mixed with sober awareness. Of the estimated bomber force that approached Britain tonight, perhaps 2/3 never reached London airspace. Those that did penetrate the defensive zone were harried continuously, forced to drop their bombs haphazardly or jettison loads early to escape pursuing fighters. The AI radar systems, working properly at last, had achieved the force multiplication effect that doctrine predicted. But operational reality had rarely delivered. Tommy continues monitoring the withdrawing formations, ensuring no bombers attempt to circle back or exploit gaps in the defensive coverage. His exhaustion is profound, the accumulated stress of hours spent coaxing unreliable equipment into functioning while lives hung in the balance. But there's satisfaction too, the knowledge that his technical skill and refusal to accept defeat contributed materially to tonight's outcome. The radar scope's steady glow shows a sky gradually clearing of enemy contacts, the immediate threat receding with each passing minute. By dawn, at 4:30 a.m. on November 3rd, 1943, the skies are quiet over RAF Biggin Hill. But the evidence of night's battle is undeniable. Wreckage from shot-down Luftwaffe bombers litters the Channel waters, creating debris fields that stretch for miles. The radar had delivered its promised capability when properly calibrated and operated, but not without significant cost to both sides. Fighter command reports show that over half the night fighters sustained combat damage, with several aircraft lost to enemy defensive fire during repeated engagements. Jack's Spitfire touches down as dawn breaks, his landing slightly rough from fatigue that makes his hands tremble on the controls. He shuts off the engine and sits motionless in the cockpit for a long moment, feeling the accumulated stress drain away slowly. He's done it, survived another mission, contributed to a significant tactical victory that may reshape the night war over Britain. But at what cost to comrades who didn't return, to aircraft that won't fly again? Major Henderson meets him on the tarmac as Jack climbs stiffly from his cockpit, both men understanding what the other has experienced tonight. "We got them," Henderson says quietly, his voice carrying across the concrete in the morning stillness. Intelligence estimates put total Luftwaffe losses at over 600 aircraft destroyed or damaged. But it's not enough to ease the loss of our own people. Not enough for me to sleep easily tonight. Tommy watches the horizon from the control room, monitoring the last radar returns as dawn renders night operations impossible. The radar system that was dismissed as useless at the mission's start had proven its worth beyond doubt. But the human cost weighed heavily in calculations of victory. Engineers would study tonight's breakthrough, documenting the frequency adjustments and operating parameters that transformed unreliable equipment into a war-winning technology. But for those who fought through the night, the technical achievement was inseparable from exhaustion and loss. The aftermath of victory is always quiet at 5 a.m. on November 3rd, 1943, but the price is never far behind the celebration. Tommy stares at the radar screen as dawn light filters through the control room windows, diluting the green glow into pale insignificance. The equipment has worked reliably for hours now, stable and effective in ways that seemed impossible during initial testing and deployment. But it's only a small piece of a much larger puzzle involving training, tactics, coordination, and human endurance under impossible stress. Preliminary damage assessments from London arrived throughout the morning, painting a picture of the night's success, where intelligence expected 200 tons of bombs to fall on the capital, causing massive casualties and infrastructure damage. The reality proved dramatically different. Most bomber formations were turned back or destroyed before reaching their targets, with only scattered bombs falling on outlying areas. Civilian casualties were measured in dozens rather than thousands, a testament to the defensive effort that prevented catastrophe. But the victory came at a price that would be measured carefully in after-action reports. RAF Fighter Command lost aircraft and pilots, some to enemy fire and others to mechanical failures or navigation errors in the darkness. Ground crews worked through the night repairing damaged fighters, replacing engines, patching bullet holes in airframes. The radar operators who guided fighters to their targets paid in exhaustion, their contribution invisible but essential to the night's outcome. "Maybe next time will be easier," Tommy whispers to himself, but he knows the battle is never truly over. The radar system will continue to evolve, incorporating lessons learned from tonight's operational experience. Luftwaffe tactics will adapt in response, seeking new ways to counter British defensive advantages. The future of aerial warfare is now written in those static lines and electronic blips, in the marriage of human skill and technological capability that defines modern combat. Records filed later that month would note that November 3, 1943 marked a turning point in night defence operations over Britain, though the full implications wouldn't be understood for years afterward. The breakthrough of AI radar systems, once dismissed as unreliable and useless by skeptical engineers, had turned the tide of aerial warfare over Britain. But it was not the machine alone that achieved victory on that November night. It was the perseverance of men like Tommy Walker and Jack Thompson, who in the face of overwhelming odds and imperfect technology learned to trust the machines that had been built to save them. The story of this victory remains preserved in operational records and after-action reports, a testament to the men and machines who took down 600 bombers one blip at a time, rewriting the mathematics of night defense through technical innovation and human courage. The files were archived without dramatic commentary, just numbers and tactical assessments, but the numbers themselves had already rewritten the war.